Howdy folks, just going to go ahead and answer a couple questions we had over the past 2 weeks, a number of good ones. First ones are really talking about kind of recovery and then optimizing training. So both the first two questions are talking about effectively how do we get back to where we were beforehand. So we talked a little bit about how satellite cells are going to go ahead, become activated, fuse to damaged muscle fibers, and in turn increase the number of nuclei. So now that you have more nuclei, and the idea is that humans retain them to a certain extent, you're going to be able to go back to your previous high level of training faster than it took you to get there in the first place. Now that being said, in order to get there, the stimulus is probably going to have to be very close to the same than it was initially to cause those body changes. So you're not going to be able to train easier to get back to where you were beforehand. Now, training harder might possibly help, but do keep in mind, like anything else, we do have that curvilinear relationship to we want to get that optimal volume of training, not train maximally and either not make as much progress or barely make any at all. And congratulations, we've just beaten ourselves down. So figure your training intensity, your training volume is going to be very similar. It might be a little bit lower, it might be a little bit higher, but probably trying to train to get used to the volumes that you were previously, and that's probably going to, if you can, get back to those previous levels, get you there at probably the best rate you're going to, given limits of human physiology. So the second question, or third question, is effectively what's going to be the best way to build our cardiovascular endurance? Is it long, slow distance training, LSD, or is it performing short sprints? Now, in reality, it's probably going to come down to making sure we're doing as much volume as we can tolerate to enhance our performance. That same thing of we want to give ourselves that highest dosage. So picking one or the other, each has their own advantages for economy of effort, total training time economy, and then total intensity and effort. So probably trying to do both of them is going to be your best bet. If you had to pick one, it's going to depend on who you're working with. If you're working with someone who's young, really healthy, we're not limited in any way, shape, or form, probably go with the short sprints. If we're dealing with someone who's older, more mileage on the body, then probably trying to pick some low impact, long, slow distance training. So things that are going to go ahead and help increase our aerobic capacity without doing a lot of damage to the body, adding even more that we have to recover from. So, but really, most of the research shows it's going to be the dosage. So the total mileage and everything else, that's going to be what's the most important factor to really focus on first. Of course, it's easier to get in a total volume with LSD than it is to try to get 10 miles of sprinting. Intensity is just way, way hard on the body. Now, we got a question about the use of caffeine and its dehydrating effect. Acutely, for people that are caffeine naive, it definitely seems to help you lose a little bit of fluid, especially in that milligram range you're looking at. Remember listening about milligrams per kilogram of body mass. So in these studies, we're probably talking about 200 mg for somebody that's only $150. So you're really looking at almost 3 milligrams per kilogram of body mass. Now, folks that are taking in caffeine chronically, they get used to it. And if you're drinking your caffeine in a beverage, so tea, coffee, soda, otherwise, you're probably actually not really dehydrating out your tissues that much, if at all. And once again, it's something that you're going to become habituated to pretty quickly. So you're going to get used to it. It's not going to be as, disadvantageous for your health relatively quickly. And the final question, which is when we're talking about giving ourselves the blood flow to our skin and our muscles when we're exercising. Now, it's not actually a reduction in your cardiac output. The key thing is your muscles have a really big metabolic demand. So we're sending a lot of blood flow there so we can get oxygen there. We can utilize it for aerobic metabolism along with delivering other nutrients or removing waste products. Now, we also have a demand to our skin. Thanks to vasodilation in the area, that's going to cause us to send more blood flow to the skin, which is going to in turn allow us to sweat more. And if we sweat more, it's going to be easier to thermoregulate. Neither of these cause a overall decrease in our cardiac output. Instead, they have an increased demand on our cardiac output. And since we only have a finite maximal cardiac output, once we are essentially at that cardiovascular maximal output, well, the muscles are going to be the demand that we reach first, typically before the thermoregulation of the skin, obviously in the idea that we're exercising in the heat. So the reduction that we might have in cardiac output from being in the heat, that's cardiovascular drift. And that's being caused to the loss of plasma volume thanks to sweating, which in turn is causing our blood to become more concentrated, which is then making it, instead of becomes more viscous, so it's more like pumping molasses or maple syrup than it was pumping water beforehand, which in turn doesn't allow the ventricles to fill as much, so our stroke volume goes down, so the heart rate tries to go up to counteract it, but our heart rate can only go so high. So, thanks for listening today, guys. You guys have a great week and look forward to the next questions. Bye-bye.